Faceless and forgotten, Friend is one of the greatest antagonists I have ever seen. The mystery behind his character and motivations are a massive part of what makes 20th Century Boys such a gripping tale. Throughout the story, you constantly ask yourself who Friend is, and even once you think you know, your expectations are completely subverted. After all, 20th Century Boys is a story in large part about identity itself, both narratively and thematically. The ultimate reveal is that Friend is not just one antagonist, but rather two, the first of whom is Fukube, and the second of whom is Katsumata. I'm creating this video out of appreciation for my single favorite stretch of chapters from this series. Chapters 171 to 176 are by far my single favorite part of the series for two reasons. First, because of how well the arc characterizes Fukube, and second, because of how well it uses facelessness as a motif. It's especially fitting that these chapters take place right in between the final time skip of the series, right after Friend's rebirth at the attempted assassination of the Pope. These chapters are what separate the middle from the end of the series. It serves as a nice send-off to Fukube, and also as the origin to Katsumata's character arc. Chapters 171 and 172 go over one of Fukube's initial meetings with Kenji's group. Here, we see the foundation of the new Book of Prophecy, as well as how Fukube came to meet Sadakio. At the beginning of 171, Kenji's group, impatient to read some manga, grabbed Fukube's issue of This Week Sunday, but in their excitement, accidentally dropped the magazine into mud. Fukube responds by inviting them over to his house for more manga, albeit internally looking down upon them. Fukube's goal here is to befriend everyone and become part of Kenji's group, so he outwardly acts very kind and forgiving. But as Kenji's group reads Fukube's manga, they eventually rush back to the base, leaving Fukube behind and forgetting about him altogether. The chapter ends with Fukube finding the base himself, reading their Book of Prophecy, and then encountering Sadakio. Upon Sadakio's request, Fukube verbally agrees to be his friend. However, as was with the case in the magazine incident, despite behaving honorably, Fukube scorns everyone, especially Sadakio. All this serves to highlight Fukube's insecurity, solitude, and alienation from his peers in society. This kind of characterization is further developed at the beginning of chapter 172, where Fukube shows Kenji his essay on dreams. Here, the title refers to Fukube's desire to stand out by going to the Osaka Expo of 1970, which he continuously obsesses over throughout the stretch of chapters. After reading Fukube's essay, Kenji excitedly spreads word about the expo to the entire class. Despite the rumors not mentioning Fukube or how he's supposed to be at the expo, Fukube takes solace in the fact that the rumors spread by Kenji originated from himself, further demonstrating just how self-centered he was. Flash forward some time later, and it turns out that Fukube himself actually couldn't even go to the Osaka Expo in the first place. Later, very much in contrast with the chapter's title, A True Friend, he pressures Sadakio into keeping this a secret, using friendship as collateral. Contrary to his words at the end of chapter 171, here, Fukube outright claims that he and Sadakio are not friends, and in order to be friends, Sadakio must help hide Fukube for that entire summer. Here, Fukube shows that he and Sadakio are not on an equal playing field. In any normal situation, two friends would seemingly be on or near the same level. At the very least, there would be some mutual respect between both parties. But at a fundamental level, Fukube never truly understood what a friend really was. Friends aren't meant to treat you like a god or an icon, but what would a kid who's never had a friend truly know about one? Anyways, following this exchange comes one of the most interesting parts of the arc. Fukube takes Sadakio's mask and pretends to be him in order to preserve the story that Fukube was at the Osaka Expo. However, much like Sadakio, he gets robbed and beaten up by a group of bullies. After they leave, he wanders about in the blazing heat before stumbling upon a window. He takes off his mask, laments on how he isn't supposed to exist here, stares at his own reflection, and there he sees nothing. Fukube is depicted as completely and utterly faceless. This scene serves in stark contrast to chapter 18, where Kenji gazes at his own reflection in the window, quite similarly to how Fukube just did here. However, whereas Kenji saw himself as an invincible man, Fukube saw himself as an invisible one. This highlights Fukube's fragile sense of identity and hollow outlook upon the world. This insecurity is ultimately the seed to what led Fukube to fall down the path he eventually did. Flash forward to the next chapter, and Fukube is at home. He writes in his diary a log of what was supposed to have happened had he actually gone to the expo and kept a consistent story. Little did he know, however, that regardless of whether or not he went to the expo, nobody would care. Anyways, he takes off Sadakio's mask, stares at his own reflection in the mirror, and realizes he indeed does have a face. But he asks himself, "Who are you?" As if he are questioning the significance of his own identity in the first place. Afterwards, following an uninvited visit from a bullied and beaten up Sadakio, they head over to an abandoned haunted mansion and hang up a teru bozu, whereby Fukube hopes to scare someone through his own effort. After all, if nobody can notice and appreciate Fukube with their own eyes, maybe they can notice his mischievous work. Sadakio suggests for them to draw a face upon it, but Fukube responds with one of the most chilling lines from the series. No, it's scariest without a face. This line highlights the qualities of Fukube's own presence within the series. While Fukube himself can be described as little more than an arrogant and conceited child, Friend as a whole is a completely different story. He's such a terrifying villain, in large part because he's represented by an icon and is depicted facelessly. But in the end, you can take this claim further and apply it even to Katsumata. At least to me, Katsumata is the scarier, or at least more menacing, of the two characters that take on the role of friend. The story is fundamentally one of identity, and the fact that the second friend's identity remains so nebulous makes his character all the more fascinating. So it's no wonder that later on, even Fukube believes that facelessness makes for a much more endearing villain, hence why he dons the mask. Soon, a couple enter the mansion. After this, Fukube and Sadakio hide, waiting to see the couple's reaction to the teru bozu. However, they run in fear, screaming that they'd witnessed a faceless ghost woman, or an operabo, before even reaching the staircase the teru bozu was on. Sadakio comments that they weren't actually scared of the teru bozu, but rather of something else entirely. What this is left ambiguous, however. Upon hearing the suggestion, Fukube looks behind him and into the mirror. After some self-reflection, Fukube denies Sadakio's claim. But a page later, he once again stares in the mirror, and in his reflection, his face is replaced by a teru bozu's. This continues the very same exploration of Fukube's sense of identity from earlier in this stretch of chapters, but this time around, what does the teru bozu represent? The literal translation for teru bozu is Shine Shine Monk, and in Japanese culture, it has been traditionally thought of to have magical powers to ward off bad weather. One possible interpretation of this is that when Fukube's face is replaced with that of a teru bozu's, it represents his desire to be special, and possibly even foreshadows how he replicates Katsumata's powers. After all, it's revealed later down the line that when Fukube took on the role of friend, everything supernatural that he did was completely staged. A large part of this was actually done by Katsumata. So this also comes back to the beginning of the chapter, where Fukube asked if he was either Sadakio or Katsumata, both of whom Fukube pretended to be or replicate at several points in the story. However, there is yet another possible interpretation of this scene. Why exactly did the couple run away in the first place? What did they see? Was it perhaps a hiding Katsumata? Maybe the back of Fukube's head? Just something in their imagination? Or maybe an actual ghost, like Manjome in 21st Century Boys? I would lean more towards one of the last of the aforementioned possibilities, but the answer to the question remains unclear, even by the end of 21st Century Boys. Regardless, when Fukube sees himself as faceless in the mirror, it may thus reflect how he sees, or wishes to see himself. The couple noticed a faceless monster, but not the work of Fukube. So if he became a faceless monster, then perhaps he would be noticed too. Flash forward to chapter 174, and we see Fukube's feeble attempts at attention-seeking continue. At the very beginning, Sadakio gives word that Kenji and Ocho had now heard of the rumors surrounding the Teruterubozu in the haunted mansion. This makes Fukube astoundingly pleased, as people have now noticed his work. He follows this up by working on his journal, outlining in excruciating detail what he would be doing today at the Osaka Expo, as if it would be read out loud in class and people would notice him for it. Thereafter, Kenji pays an unexpected visit to invite Fukube over with them. Fukube hides since he's supposed to be at the expo, but upon reflection, determines he wants to see Kenji scared. So he takes Sadakio's mask and heads over to spy on the group. However, Kenji notices him and tells him to take off the mask. Fukube does so, quickly explaining why he's not at the expo, but Kenji turns around and heads to the mansion before even hearing him out. So Fukube put all that work into securing his alibi and whereabouts, but in the end, nobody cared. He was simply forgotten. He put in all that effort into his journal as if people actually cared enough about his whereabouts, but nobody did. And with the mask on, he was far more noticeable than he was without it. So as the group heads over to the haunted mansion, they eventually stumble across the hanging Teruterubozu. But rather than being frightened by it, they simply laugh at it. Fukube laments over this, repeatedly telling himself that he failed. Once again, his efforts had failed to be recognized. Kenji and Ocho head up the stairs, having heard something slide. Fukube believes that they heard Sadakio, and so he sets out to find him. Upon spotting him, Fukube drags Sadakio out to right behind the Teruterubozu. There, he threatens him to claim responsibility for the prank, or else Fukube will not only cease to be Sadakio's friend, but also kill him altogether. This scene serves to further highlight Fukube's lack of understanding as to what a friend really is, and even further showcases his extremely fragile ego. Friend was previously depicted as this chilling, inhumane monster, this cult of personality, this icon. But behind that mask was just a boy deprived of any attention as a child. His motivations emerged from an extremely childish desire to be recognized by his peers. And it's such an awful and ridiculous reason to commit atrocities on the scale he eventually does, which contributes to the sense that 20th Century Boys is just a child's game that's gone on for far too long. This sense of never-ending childishness and a perpetual lack of presence is even more prevalent as we jump into chapter 175. From the start, we find out that Yoshitsune heard this conversation, only to forget it as an adult, and as he listened in on it, they were all interrupted by Kenji and Ocho, who seemingly noticed neither Fukube nor Sadakio. The two boys dash down the stairs, claiming to be frightened by a real ghost. Following this, Yoshitsune runs along with them and escapes the mansion. However, Fukube, seemingly envious of everyone else's ability to see the ghost, desires to go upstairs and see one himself. And so, he and Sadakio head up the second floor of the mansion and enter a room. Here is where things get really interesting. Sadakio screams at the sight of a ghost that neither the reader nor Fukube can see. Curiously, we see Sadakio look around and only scream at the sight of a ghost upon looking in Fukube's direction. Fukube's reflection, we see his face blurred out, almost as if he was once again faceless, or maybe the ghost himself all along. Perhaps this is what Sadakio saw when he cried ghost. Or maybe Sadakio never saw a ghost and just acted as if he saw one for the sake of friendship. However, both the couple from chapter 173, as well as Kenji and Ocho in chapter 175, claim to have seen a ghost as well, implying that it probably wasn't actually Fukube. Considering that psychic powers and the supernatural do exist within 20th Century Boys, at the very least, it is certainly possible that they all indeed did see a ghost. However, even after Sadakio's scream, Fukube, or at least the reader, simply can't see it. So he looks at his reflection in the broken mirror and asks himself, or perhaps the ghost, "Who are you?" This is another one of the most chilling panels from the series. One can interpret the shattered mirror as a visual metaphor for Fukube's fragmented and broken sense of identity. Fukube's lack of a real sense of self is even more prevalent as we continue beyond this scene. After leaving the mansion, Fukube is seen writing in his journal, in which he falsely narrates over having been at the expo once again. He continuously writes that the expo was fun on each manuscript, constantly clinging obsessively over this one idea on the expo. It's also a common thing for Fukube to repeat himself, even in his internal thoughts. We can see this later in the chapter over the next few pages. This is evident in Fukube's internal thoughts upon the announcement of Sadakio's departure from the school. He obsessively repeats the same sentences again and again. "Read my journal, read my journal." He didn't say a single thing about this all vacation. He didn't say a single thing about this all vacation. Sadakio, that jerk, that jerk, that jerk, that jerk, that jerk. What about the expo? What about the expo? Someone, come and ask me about the expo. Someone, come and ask me about the expo. But in the end, nobody noticed Fukube. And so, he dejectedly leaves school that day and encounters Yamane and Manjome, of whom the former is surprised by Fukube's lack of presence at the expo. The beginning of the arc's final chapter continues this exchange, revealing that Yamane actually spread Fukube's idea from the New Book of Prophecy to Ocho, who used some of them in the original version. This exchange further shows Yamane sucking up to Fukube, praising him by calling him the best friend or superhuman, even though Fukube is as bad of a friend as a kid could possibly have. Yet again, it shows just how egocentric and narcissistic Fukube was. Coincidentally, the title of the chapter is also Superhuman, which is what Fukube wanted to be seen as. Rather than wanting to be seen as a proper friend as per the conventional sense, he just wanted to be the center of attention at all times. Following a conversation surrounding the development of the blood-draining virus and its vaccine, enters a boy wearing the same mask as Sadakio. However, at no point does he speak, implying that this was in fact Katsumata and not Sadakio. This is further implied in chapter 177, which is the beginning of the next arc, which opens up with Katsumata waking from his dream, or perhaps memory uploading process. After the masked boy joins the fray, they head outside and are eventually approached by a young Manjome, who invites Fukube to join him. Fukube initially displays some level of surprise, but ultimately just walks onwards without giving a definitive answer. It's interesting that in this exchange, Fukube neither speaks outwardly, nor does he narrate internally. We don't even hear his thoughts until the chapter's final panel. This continues on until we see Fukube perform a trick, whereby he hangs himself and returns back to life. Upon the success of this so-called miracle, Fukube demands Donkey spread word of it. However, Donkey vehemently refuses, dismissing this all as a trick. Fukube and co. don't take this lightly and decide to banish Donkey. However, Donkey jumps straight out the window, fearful of something, or perhaps someone. However, immediately afterwards, Fukube slips up and starts choking from the noose, almost to death. All this even further highlights Fukube's desire to be recognized by his peers, as well as the starting point to his extremity. In an attempt to be noticed by his peers, he went from lending manga to hanging a teru bozu to faking his own death to running a cult to enact a prophecy. Fukube took an extremely childish sense of envy and obsessed with it far too long. This arc highlights the beginning of Fukube's descent into madness and makes his character all the more compelling. This ends the arc as Katsumata wakes up with the memory transfer process interrupted, marking the end of the flashback and the beginning of the series' penultimate arc. These 6 or so chapters serve as a demarcation between the second and third main parts of the story, or rather as an arc bridging the 2 characters that take on the role of friend. It's a nice send-off to Fukube, and a subtle series of hints as to the true nature of Katsumata. But if there's one aspect of this arc that connects the 2 characters the most, it's facelessness. Facelessness is a prominent motif throughout all of 20th Century Boys, but was most exemplified in this particular arc, especially within chapters 172 and 173, where Fukube sees himself as completely faceless in his reflection. Urasawa has been said to have had a fascination for mirrors ever since he was young, and I've seen him use mirrors as visual metaphors in both Monster and 20th Century Boys. However, Urasawa's use of the mirror is particularly intriguing during this mini arc of 20th Century Boys because he uses it to build upon an overarching theme of identity. Urasawa's works have often gone into depth on philosophical topics, and this is not the first time he's gone over the concept of identity. In Monster, Johann Liebert was referred to as the nameless monster, and someone completely deprived of his humanity. But in 20th Century Boys, a more accurate representation of someone stripped of their humanity would be a faceless monster, just like Fukube and Katsumata. To me, that makes this motif especially intriguing and thought-provoking. This characterization indirectly enriches Katsumata's character arc from later on in the series, and especially in 21st Century Boys. With all that said, thank you for watching. This was my first YouTube video ever, and I would deeply appreciate it if you were to provide me with some constructive feedback. I wish you all the best.